Chapter 1. The coldest night of my life. Snow doesn't just fall. It devours sound. It buries screams. It presses against the bones like silence made physical. That's what Saris felt as she stumbled through the snow-covered ridge. Her bare feet sliced by ice, and her breath fogging in short, frantic gasps. The white landscape around her glowed with the ghostly shimmer of moonlight, cold and indifferent. She hadn't screamed when he rejected her. She'd simply blinked, stunned as Alpha Daxon, her fated mate, declared before the gathered pack that she was unworthy of his mark. An Omega, a healer, too soft, too plain, not Luna material, not the mattering Alpha should be tied to. His words had sliced her cleaner than any blade. And then he turned to another, a she-wolf with sharpened pride and glittering power in her eyes. "This is who the moon intended for me," he had said, "not this." Saris hadn't waited to be told to leave. The rejection was public enough. Her heart had stopped trying to reason with the pain the moment the bond broke like glass in her chest, shattered, irreversible. She had walked away. No coat, no boots, nothing but the thin healer's wrap she'd worn to the ceremony, and still she hadn't screamed. The snowstorm found her after the trine, and by then, her legs trembled from cold and adrenaline. Each step away from the pack felt like detaching from air. There was no fire in her blood anymore, no pulse of that invisible tether that had once connected her to him. Saris collapsed beside a crooked pine, her breath ragged. The pain wasn't just emotional, it was physical. The breaking of a mate bond always was. Her heart spasmed, her limbs refused to move. Her wolf lay silent, caged deep inside her. She thought of the others who had suffered the same fate. She remembered the way the elders spoke in hushed tones about Omegas rejected too young, too easily, who vanished into snowdrifts no one ever found. Perhaps she would be one of them. Perhaps that was her story now. A whisper of wind swept over her cheek, lifting a strand of her frost-laced hair. The cold kissed her skin like goodbye. She closed her eyes. A low growl pulled her back from the edge of unconsciousness. At first, she thought it was her mind playing tricks, a hallucination of her wolf, awakening to shield her one last time. But then, she heard the crunch of footsteps, swift and unhesitating. Saris opened her eyes. A wolf, not white like the storm, but dark, cold gray, and massive. His eyes glowed with an unnatural amber light, not of rage, but of alertness, of something wild and aware. He padded forward through the snow, head lowered, watching her. Too weak to run, too broken to fear. Saris whispered, "Go on then, finish it." The wolf paused. Then shockingly, he lowered his body beside her, pressing his warmth into her side. She gasped. His fur radiated heat, like he had swallowed fire. His breath was steady. Not a rogue beast, not a hungry predator. A protector, a sentry. A heartbeat passed, then another. And finally, in the kind of voice that doesn't come from a mouth, but from the marrow of your soul, Saris heard something strange. "Not tonight, little one. The snow doesn't take you tonight." She froze. No lips moved. The words weren't sound, but they were real. They reached inside her with the intimacy of a memory. The wolf pressed closer, and the heat of him wrapped around her like a second skin. He stayed through the wind, through the rising storm, through the numbing pull of exhaustion. She didn't sleep so much as fall into darkness, with a hand pour against her ribs, tethering her to life. When she woke, it was dawn. The storm had passed. The sky was a pale violet, streaked with weak sunlight. And the wolf, he was still there, curled beside her, like a guardian statue. Only now he was bleeding. Saris sat up slowly, her muscles groaning in protest. The snow around him was stained crimson. A deep gash ran along his flank, fresh and angry. "You saved me," she whispered hoarsely, her voice cracking from cold and grief. "And now you're dying. The wolf didn't move. His breathing was shallow. His eyes opened, those strange, knowing eyes, and locked onto hers. There was no panic, no fear, just trust. He had chosen to protect her, a stranger, a marked and abandoned Omega no one wanted. She placed her hands on his fur, and for the first time in hours, her healer's instinct stirred. Slowly, gently, the way spring creeps into frozen ground. Saris whispered an old incantation. Not magic, not exactly, but a rhythm of care. An ancient lullaby passed through bloodlines of healers. She cleaned the wound with snow, then tore the bottom of her wrap and pressed the fabric into the wound. Her fingers trembled, not from cold anymore, but from purpose. "I won't let you die," she told him, voice steadier now. "Not after what you did for me." He blinked once, slowly, like he understood. "I'll call you Fenric," she said softly, "if you don't mind." The name came from a dream she once had as a child, of a shadow wolf who walked between worlds. The wolf huffed a breath as if in approval. Then he collapsed fully into the snow, unconscious but alive. And Saris, who had been left to die by her mate, began to live again on the coldest night of her life, wrapped in the warmth of a stranger's silent vow. Chapter 2. The stranger with fire in his eyes. The cave was dark by the time Saris stirred again. The fire burned down to embers. Her breath fogged softly in the chill air, and for a moment she forgot where she was. The scent of pine smoke, blood, and wet fur brought it all rushing back. The snowstorm, the rejection, the stranger, Fenric. She turned her head toward him. He was no longer a wolf. Where the injured animal had lain, now rested a man, bare-chested despite the cold, broad-shouldered and lean with strength coiled beneath his skin. Pale scars mapped across his chest, some old, some newer. His face was shadowed, cheek resting against his arm. He was still, save for the rise and fall of his chest. Saris didn't move, didn't breathe. His hair was dark and slightly matted from blood and ice, and his jaw was tight, even in sleep. There was something about him that didn't belong to the wilderness. Something carved out of hardship rather than savagery. Something dangerous, maybe, but not cruel. And then, as if he could sense her gaze, his eyes opened. Amber gold lit like a forest fire behind them. Saris didn't flinch, though her pulse thrummed wildly. "You shifted," she said quietly, her voice rough from sleep. "You saved me," he replied just as quiet. His voice was lower than she expected. Rasp, tired, but steady. A long silence passed between them. Sick with all the words, neither of them had the strength to say. Finally, Saris looked away and poked the fire back to life. "I didn't save you. You found me first." His voice held the hint of a dry smile. "You didn't leave me to die. That counts for something." She didn't respond. The last time she trusted someone's smile, it had cost her a future. "I'm Fenric," he added, shifting to sit upright with a quiet grunt of pain. "Saris." His gaze sharpened slightly at her name. "The healer." She froze. "You've heard of me." He looked away toward the fire. "I've heard of the girl who was supposed to be Luna to Alpha Daxon, the one he left unmarked." Her stomach nodded. "I don't want to talk about that," she said, colder than intended. Fenric nodded once, accepting the boundary without protest. "Then we won't." Another silence. This one gentler, the kind that left space for wounds to breathe. "How far did you carry me?" she asked eventually. "Far enough. I knew this cave from before." "Before what?" His lips tightened. "Before I stopped being anyone's pack." That answer rang familiar. The ache of exile, the quiet of no longer belonging, the endless question of who you were if no one claimed you. "Are you a rogue?" she asked. "No," he said without hesitation. "I'm something else." The way he said it made her believe him. She didn't press. "I can treat that gash Benny in the morning," she said after a beat. "Once I've rested and the light's stronger." Fenric gave a short nod. "You're not what I expected. Most people think healers are soft." she said. I didn't mean that. She glanced at him again. What did you mean? I expected someone broken. Saras met his gaze, full on. Then there was no defiance in it, no anger, just truth. I was broken the night he left me, the night the mark never came. And then in a voice that barely reached beyond the fire's crackle, she added, But I didn't die. They stared at each other, something like understanding passing between them. You don't have to stay, she told him, gesturing to the mouth of the cave. Once you've healed, you're free to go. I won't ask questions. Fenric's brows furrowed. And what about you? I'll keep walking, she said. North? Maybe. There are old healer circles beyond the Frostlands. Places where a name means more than a mate. That sounds lonely. It sounds free. He looked at her like he wanted to say something more, but instead, he leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes again. Saras watched the fire. Her fingers trembled slightly, whether from cold or something deeper, she couldn't tell. But for the first time since the night Daxon rejected her, she felt not safe, but seen, not claimed, but not discarded either. Just here, with a man who didn't ask for her mark or her past, a stranger with fire in his eyes. And though she didn't trust easily anymore, something in her whispered that she would remember this moment, long after the storm had passed. She lay back, pulling her cloak tighter, eyes on the flickering shadows on the cave ceiling. The fire's warmth curled around her. Tomorrow she would decide her next step. But tonight she would rest beside the wolf who had found her in the snow and not left. Chapter 3. I never needed a mate to matter. Saras didn't leave the cave for 3 more days. The snowstorm had quieted by morning, but the wind still whispered through the trees with a warning edge. Outside was danger, hunger, memory. Inside there was only silence and survival. And the slow, stubborn presence of the man who hadn't asked for anything. Fenrich stayed close but never hovered. He didn't question her when she rose early to collect herbs in the sparse patches of thawing earth. He didn't speak when she cleaned his wounds, wrapping them in strips torn from her cloak. He didn't offer false praise when she mixed pickases by instinct and experience, her hands remembering the motions long before her heart did. Instead, he simply watched quietly, patiently. It was unnerving at first. Saras was used to being ignored, or worse, dismissed. In Daxon's pack, her healing was taken for granted. Her unmarked status, a reminder of her failure to become Luna. She was necessary, but invisible. But Fenric saw her, not like a mate, not like a man with promises on his tongue, just a person, and that made all the difference. On the 4th morning, they began walking. I know a place, Fenric said, rolling his stiff shoulder as they stepped out of the cave. It's not far, safe. You'll be warmer there. She hesitated only briefly before nodding. Trust wasn't easy, but something in his voice, steady, grounded, pushed her feet forward. They traveled in silence, moving through forest paths carved by old wolf trails. Trees loomed tall around them, branches bare but laced with frost that glinted like stars in the pale light. Birds called distantly, weary and high. After 2 hours, Saras finally spoke. Why? Help me. Fenric didn't break stride, because someone once helped me. Who? My sister. That caught her off guard. She hadn't pictured him as someone with family. Most rogues she'd known had lost everything. Most wolves without a pack were either broken or brutal. She's gone now, he added, but she taught me what mercy looks like. Saras swallowed the lump in her throat. She didn't ask more. The grief in his voice was clear. By midday, they reached the edge of a valley, a narrow ridge overlooking a tucked-away clearing. Nestled between the trees were a scattering of cabins, weathered and low, smoke curling faintly from their chimneys. Not a full-pack settlement, but enough to shelter a handful of outcasts. They don't follow alphas here, Fenrich said. No ranks, no marks required, just rules to keep the peace. Saris blinked against the brightness of it. The idea of a place where her status meant nothing, where no one would look at her and see only what she lacked. "They'll let me stay," she asked, "if I vouch for you, and if you hadn't." He looked at her then, eyes lit with something like quiet defiance. "You'd still be welcome." She didn't realize how tightly her hands had clenched until she let them go. The settlement wasn't what she expected. There were no grand halls, no lunar ceremonies or warrior ranks. Just cabins built by hand, a shared garden space protected by wooden fences, and a small healing hut lined with jars and dried herbs. It was this last one that drew Saris most, the healer there. An older woman named Ilna took one look at her and nodded. "You have hands that know," she said simply, then stepped aside to let her in. It wasn't a test. It was trust. Saris barely breathed as she stepped into the small, warm space. Herbs hung from the rafters. Baskets lined the walls. Everything was practical, humble, real. Ilna didn't ask her past, only said, "The north fields need tending. Blight's coming early this year." And so Saris worked. She gathered roots. She mixed tinctures. She taught a younger girl named Brina how to wrap a burn with cooled ash root. No one asked who she had been. No one mentioned the mark she'd never worn. And with every day that passed, Saris began to remember who she was, before the promise of Luna status ever clouded her purpose. A healer. A wolf who listened to pain and gave balm instead of orders. A woman who didn't need a mate to matter. It wasn't until the 7th evening that she saw Fenric again. He was standing near the forest's edge, speaking quietly with another man, both of them watching the horizon. Something in their posture made her pause, alert but not alarmed. She approached slowly. "What is it?" she asked. Fenric looked over his shoulder, then tilted his head toward the mountains. "Tracks. Wolves. Too many for a hunt. Not enough for a pack. Rogues, then, or scouts. Do you think they're looking for something?" He met her gaze. "I think they're looking for someone." Her blood turned cold. "Daxon, we don't know yet." Saris stepped closer, keeping her voice low. "If he finds me, we won't let him." The certainty in his voice stunned her. No hesitation, no doubt. "We," she echoed. "You're part of this place now, Saris. You didn't need to earn it. You just needed to survive long enough to get here." Her throat tightened. This wasn't what she expected from her story. Not after rejection, not after abandonment in the snow. But here she stood, whole, healing, and seen. That night, Saris lay awake in the healer's hut, staring at the rafters. She wasn't afraid. Not of Daxon, not anymore. What haunted her was something different, something newer. A quiet question, one that came with Fenric's voice, steady and sure. You didn't need to earn it. You just needed to survive. Was survival enough? Could it be the start of something more? Not a love story. Not yet. Maybe never. But something true. For now, that was enough. Chapter 4. Whispers of the Moon's Error. The first whisper came from the trees, not spoken in words, not even in voices. It was in the way the wind shivered against bark, the way the night sky held stillness like breath caught in the lungs of the world. Saris stood at the edge of the garden beds, early morning frost glittering around her boots. She felt it deep in her chest before she ever heard it from another mouth. Something had shifted, not in the forest, in the bond. A tether that should have long snapped after rejection now hummed faintly. Not enough to pull her toward Daxon, but enough to remind her it had once existed. Enough to remind her that rejection by the mouth did not always mean severance by the soul. She pressed her hand to her heart, then to the soil. Something had been undone and not by her. Rumors traveled quickly in hidden places. 2 days after the tracks near the mountain were found, Ilna handed her a folded note. There were no names on it, just 5 words, scribbled in thin, blocky script. The moon made a mistake. Saris stared at it, her hands trembling. Ilna, ever calm, only nodded. "I've seen it before," she said as if it were a fact of nature. "Rare, but not impossible." "What?" "A bond rejected before its full bloom. When the moon blesses too early, sometimes the wolves panic. Choose pride instead." Saris blinked, and the bond survives. Illa's dark eyes settled on her. Sometimes it grows stronger, as if defying the rejection itself. The healer set a jar of crushed bark down beside a row of salves. Her voice lowered. "You feel it, don't you?" Saris didn't answer. She didn't have to. The whispers came next from Bina. They were sorting dried herbs when the younger girl spoke without looking up. "My father once told me a story about a lunar who was never marked, but still felt her mate every full moon. Said the moon refused to let go." Saris nearly dropped the sage bundle in her hands. What happened to her? She became something else. Not a Luna, not a rogue, just free. Saris stared at her. Free how? Rena shrugged. She didn't have to wait to be chosen. The moon had already chosen her. The rest was her decision. Her decision. The phrase rooted itself deep in Saris's bones. For so long, the choice had never belonged to her. She'd lived at the mercy of rank, of bond, of title. Daxon had chosen, Daxon had rejected. But what if the moon had not? What if the divine saw worth in her long before Daxon saw a throne? The bond pulsed strongest at night. She'd lie on the small cot in the healing hut, the scent of herbs lingering in the air, and suddenly a feeling, not a memory, not a longing, just a presence. Daxon's. Not his voice, not his command, just the echo of what had been. The strand of silver between them, frayed but intact. The rejection hadn't broken it. It had wounded it. And now it bled through the quietest hours, through dreams of snow and firelight, of strength that did not need a mate's approval to thrive. One night, Saris sat up abruptly. Saris stared at her. Free how? Rena shrugged. She didn't have to wait to be chosen. The moon had already chosen her. The rest was her decision. Her decision. The phrase rooted itself deep in Saris's bones. For so long. The choice had never belonged to her. She'd lived at the mercy of rank, of bond, of title. Daxon had chosen. Daxon had rejected. But what if the moon had not? What if the divine saw worth in her long before Daxon saw a throne? The bond pulsed strongest at night. She'd lie on the small cot in the healing hut, the scent of herbs lingering in the air, and suddenly a feeling, not a memory, not a longing, just a presence. Daxon's. Not his voice, not his command, just the echo of what had been. The strand of silver between them, frayed, but intact. The rejection hadn't broken it. It had wounded it. And now it bled through the quietest hours, through dreams of snow and firelight. Of strength that did not need a mate's approval to thrive. One night, Saris sat up abruptly. I never accepted it, she whispered into the dark. The rejection she had endured it, survived it. But she had never once spoken the words that severed the tie, never once released Daxon from what the moon had written in the stars. Maybe that mattered. Fenrich noticed the change in her. He didn't pry, never did. But when she hesitated during an herb-gathering trek, staring into the wind as if listening for a voice that wasn't there, he finally asked, "Are you feeling it?" She didn't pretend not to understand. Yes. He nodded slowly, the muscles in his jaw tight. Not angry, just concerned. The bond? Yes. And Daxon? I don't know. That was the truth. She wasn't pining for him. She didn't crave his touch or mourn the lunar title he gave to another. But something between them refused to die. Maybe it never had the chance to live fully in the first place. I think the moon's correcting something, she added softly. Fenrich stared at her for a long time. Do you want it to? The question rocked her more than the feeling itself. Did she want the bond healed? She turned to him, eyes brimming with more than she could say. I want to understand it first, before I decide anything. That too was the truth. And Fenrich, bless him, nodded with the patience of someone who understood the importance of choosing, even after fate had already cast its vote. By the next full moon, everything changed again. Iln called her into the hut with news that made her breath catch in her throat. 3 packs sent word to the outer circles. The older healer said, sliding a scroll across the table. They say Aluna fell sick, her bond rejected by the land. Saris's fingers shook as she unrolled it. The name etched into the ink stopped her heart. Celera, the Luna Daxon had chosen. Iln watched her carefully. They say the bond never took. Saris swallowed, but she wore his mark. Yes, but not the moon's. The words echoed like thunder in her chest, marked by teeth, but not by fate, chosen by rank, but not by soul. Saris stepped back, lightheaded. Then, what does that make me? Iln smiled gently. The wolf the moon didn't give up on. Saris stared at her hands, scarred from years of healing others. Not weak, not forgotten, just still here, still mattered. That night, alone beneath the stars, Saris stood in the clearing behind the settlement. The snow was melting now, spring teasing the edges of winter's grip. She let her wolf come forward, not fully shifting, just rising beneath the skin, watching the sky above. The moon shone full and pale. Not cruel, not cold, present, she whispered into the silence, words trembling. I'm not ready to forgive him, but I'm not broken either. The wind stirred. I never needed a mate to matter. And for the first time, since the snow left her breathless and broken, the tether between her and Daxon pulsed, not with pain, but with permission to decide, to choose for herself. Chapter 5. The Alpha's pack is dying. The first sign wasn't blood, but silence. Daxon's pack had once thrived on noise. Training howls echoing from the fields, pups racing between the barracks, warriors laughing, bickering, arguing over patrol routes. But now, the wind carried nothing. Crows circled above empty grain fields, untouched by farmer or beast. The earth, once rich and pulsing with life, lay hard and unyielding beneath withered stalks. A drought hadn't come. No sickness had swept through the land, but something deeper, older, had turned away from them. The land had rejected them, just as he had rejected her. Daxon stood at the edge of the central field, boots sinking slightly into cracked dirt. Behind him, 3 warriors waited for orders. Their faces were leaner than before, eyes weary, movements sluggish. He could smell it on them, the weakness. It clung to everything like rot. He crouched and pressed his hand to the soil, closing his eyes. Still, nothing. Once his bond to the territory had let him feel every inch of it. Wolves called it the Alpha's pulse, a sense of being stitched to the very bones of the land. But that pulse was now a whisper, faint and fading. "You're sure it isn't the weather?" he asked without turning. Thorn, his beta, shifted uncomfortably behind him. "It hasn't rained much, but that's not all. Livestock won't breed. 2 pups born last month never shifted." Daxon's eyes opened. "That shouldn't be possible." Thorn hesitated. "We've had 4 miscarriages this moon." The words landed like blows. Not just dying, unmaking. Daxon stood slowly, rubbing the dirt from his palms. His mark throbbed faintly, the scar on his shoulder a silent reminder of the choice he made, the Luna he had chosen, and the one he had not. Sarah hadn't left her quarters in days, not since the council's envoy passed through and declined to bless their union. Not since the soil stopped yielding crops. Not since her own body had turned against her, plagued by fevers no healer could name. He tried to ignore it, tried to bury it, but the whispers had begun to seep in. He chose the wrong Luna. The moon is punishing us. The mark didn't take. He clenched his fists. "Well, double the patrols. No one leaves the territory without my approval." Send for a moonseer and Thor. Don't speak of this again. Not until we know what we're dealing with. But even as he said it, the air around him remained still, unmoved, unforgiving. In the healer's den, Solera lay curled beneath wolfer blankets, her skin slick with sweat. Her breathing was shallow, her lips dry. 3 different healers had come and gone. None stayed long. They couldn't explain the dark marks spreading from her collarbone, couldn't explain why her energy waned with each passing day, or why, despite his mark on her skin, the bond had never fully opened between them. It was like a door left halfway ajar, never locking, never offering shelter. Daxon sat at her bedside, a bowl of water in one hand, cloth in the other. He dabbed at her brow without speaking. Her eyes flickered open for a moment. "Why doesn't it work?" she rasped. He froze. "What? The bond? I feel nothing." He set the cloth down. "You're tired, sick. It's temporary." She turned her head toward the wall. He didn't argue. He couldn't, because he felt it too. Nothing. The thread between them wasn't broken. It had never been woven. That night, the council's envoy returned. Only one elder came, this time, a wiry woman named Revka, her hair braided with wolf teeth. She stood in the center of the great hall and stared at Daxon for a long moment before speaking. "There is a sickness in your pack." He didn't bother hiding his frustration. "We're handling it." "No," she said plainly. "You are not." She stepped forward, eyes sharp as blades. "You marked a wolf, not chosen by the moon. You broke the bond too early, and now the land withholds its blessing." Daxon bristled. "That is superstition." "That is history," she replied. "The moon chooses carefully. Reject its will, and the land will mirror its discontent." He wanted to deny it, wanted to tell her she didn't know what she was talking about. But the land's silence answered for him. Rifa's voice lowered. "There is still time." His jaw clenched. "Time to do what?" "To restore what you broke, if she still lives." He didn't need to ask who she meant. The unmarked Omega, the healer left to die. Saris. He dreamt of her that night. Not her face, not exactly, but the scent of lavender and pine. The memory of her hands, covered in balm and crushed roots. The way she used to sit beneath the old tree outside the infirmary, weaving cord from scraps of twine. The way her eyes held steady even when he shouted, even when he ordered her to step aside so he could claim a Luna of proper status. One who looked better at his side. ... One who would not humble him with her quiet strength. In the dream, she said nothing, just watched him from across a field of frost-bitten flowers, the wind tugging gently at her cloak. Her silence hurt more than any accusation. He woke with a start, heart pounding. By morning, 2 more wolves had collapsed during training. One refused to shift. The other's coat came in mattered, dull, lifeless. The moon was not punishing the wolves. It was punishing him, and he finally understood why. He had not just rejected his mate. He had rejected the moon's will. And that mistake echoed louder with every dying crop, every fevered wolf, every breath of Solera that came harder than the last. Daxon stared out from the Alpha's balcony that night, eyes fixed on the distant hills. She was out there, alive, and the bond. It was still breathing. A thread he'd tried to sever, a truth he'd tried to bury. He didn't know if she'd listen, didn't know if she'd spit in his face. But if there was even a sliver of hope left, he had to find her. Not for himself, but for the pack, and for the mate the moon had never stopped waiting for. Chapter 6. The day he found me again. The forest felt different that morning. Sarah sensed it in her fingertips as she ran them along the bark of the old elm near the hidden creek. The leaves whispered louder, the birds stilled quicker, and something tugged low in her gut. A quiet pull, ancient and uncertain. She had felt it before, once long ago, the day her mate marked someone else. She brushed the feeling away and kept walking, basket tucked under one arm. herbs bundled in neat cloth rolls. Fenric had asked her to gather moonleaf and elderroot for the old shifter who couldn't shift anymore. She needed the walk, needed the quiet. It reminded her of the life she had made with her own hands. A life without him, without Daxon. She crossed the narrow log bridge with ease, the space pressed. Hopping onto the trail with the practiced grace of someone who had walked these woods every day for nearly a year. Her scarf caught in the breeze, fluttering around her shoulder as she knelt to snip a flowering stalk of healing bell. And then the scent hit her. Crisp pine, a touch of smoke, salt. Her hand froze. She hadn't smelled that scent in months. Not since the night he left her bleeding in the snow. Not since the mark refused to burn itself away. Not since she made peace with being unwanted. But the bond remembered. Her heartbeat quickened. She straightened slowly, fingers tightening around the handle of her basket, gaze darting through the shadows. He shouldn't be here. Not in these woods. Not in this part of the territory. Far from the maps, the borders, the control of alphas. Yet the air shimmered with his presence. And then she saw him, half hidden between two trees, cloaked in twilight, was Daxon, older than she remembered. Lena. Less like the commanding figure who once towered over her, and more like someone who'd been chased by regret for too long. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither of them breathed. Then he stepped forward. She didn't move. The wind rustled between them, carrying years of silence in its wake. "I wasn't sure if you were still alive," he said finally, voice rasped and quieter than she expected. "I was," she said, "just not to you." His shoulders stiffened as if the truth struck harder than he expected. He took another step. "Saris, don't say my name like you remember it." Her voice was calm, not angry, not broken, just certain. "I do remember it," he said, "every day, yet it didn't stop you." She shifted her basket to the other side. "Why are you here?" "I came to bring you back." She laughed once, short and sharp like a blade. "Bring me back to what?" "The place you left me to die." The wolves who watched their Luna bleed and did nothing. His expression twisted. "You were never supposed to get hurt, but I did. I made a mistake." She held his gaze. "No, Daxon, you made a choice." He went still. The trees felt like they were holding their breath. "My pack is falling apart," he said finally. "The crops are gone. The warriors can't shift. Even the bond with Solera, it never formed. Not fully." Her eyes didn't soften. "You rejected the bond the moon gave you. That kind of betrayal echoes." "I thought I was doing what was best for the pack," he said. "Choosing someone who looked the part, who carried the right bloodline. You were just the quiet healer. No title, no status. And yet, here I am," she said, lifting her chin. "Healed, whole, leading, even without a mark." He took a step closer, and, "Still mine." "No," she said, "not anymore." The words didn't shake, but they hollowed out something in him. He lowered his eyes. "I came to beg for your help. The council. They won't intervene unless the Luna returns. They know the bond was wrong." Saris turned slightly, facing the trees. Her voice dropped. "The bond may still exist, Daxon, but I don't belong to it, not the way I did." "I know." He sounded like a man breaking piece by piece. "I was afraid," he said after a long pause. "Afraid of what it would mean to choose someone they wouldn't accept. Afraid that they would think I was weak, that I was ruled by emotion." She turned back to him, eyes calm and unreadable. "And now I'd give anything to go back to that day in the snow. I would never turn away, never choose anyone but you." "It's too late to go back," she said gently. "You can only move forward." He took one more step forward. The bond stirred between them, faint, but undeniably present. like an ember under ash. Then, let me move forward beside you. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked beyond him, toward the trees, the path he had come down, and the trail that led back to the hidden pack that had taken her in. Her hand tightened on the basket. I don't know if I can trust you again, she said. Even if the moon still calls us bound, I don't ask for trust, he said. Only a chance to earn it. The silence stretched long between them, and when she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. I'll walk you back to the edge of the forest. He nodded. She turned and he followed, but with every step she kept her distance, not out of hate, not out of fear, but because sometimes the only way to reclaim your heart is to make sure it doesn't fall too easily into the hands of the one who once dropped it. Chapter 7. Rejected, not erased. The walk back through the forest was quieter than the journey out had ever been. Saris led the way, her basket swinging softly at her side, her steps steady, measured. Behind her, Daxon followed, saying nothing, his presence pressing on the bond like a whisper against her spine. It wasn't the same weight it had once been. It was frayed at the edges now, dimmer, somehow, but no less real. She hated that part most of all, that even after everything, he was still in her blood. When they reached the border of the outer clearing, the line that separated the rogue lands from the known territories of Paka, Saris stopped. The sunlight broke gently over her shoulders, and she didn't turn when she spoke. This is as far as I'll go. I understand, Daxon's voice was soft, uncertain. But I'm not going to stop here. She finally turned, facing him with a quiet strength she had learned in the months since her abandonment. I'm not the same Omega you left, she said, and I'm not waiting for you to decide I'm worth it. I know. He looked at her then like he was really seeing her for the first time. And maybe that's what makes you even more worth it now. She flinched. Not because the words were cruel, but because they were kind. Kindness was always harder. Don't come looking for me unless it's for something real, she said. Not pity, not regret. Not because your world is falling apart. I came because I couldn't breathe knowing you were out here without me. Her lips tightened. I learned to breathe without you. He took a cautious step closer, then stopped. Then teach me how. Saris didn't answer. Instead, she walked past him toward the narrow track leading deeper into the rogue territory. For a moment, she thought he might grab her wrist or call out, but he didn't. He watched her go, and for the first time since their bond formed, she didn't look back. By the time she returned to the den, Fenrich was already waiting. His arms were crossed, expression unreadable as he leaned against the worn wooden doorframe of the gathering hall. The others moved around him. Wolves who had no pack, no name, no past. Wolves who had built something sacred among the broken. You were gone longer than usual, Fenrich said as she approached. I took the long path. He tilted his head. And what did the wind bring with it? She hesitated. The past. Fenrich studied her. Does it want to become the future? She let out a quiet breath and stepped past him. It doesn't get to decide. Inside the hall was warm with low-burning fires. The elder shifter she'd gathered herbs for smiled as she passed. Children who didn't flinch at the word Omega waved from their corner. Here, she wasn't the Luna who failed. She wasn't the healer left behind. Here she was Saris. She walked into her corner of the hall, unpacked her herbs, and laid them in rows along the table, her hands steady despite the churning in her chest. Later that evening, Fenrich returned. He carried 2 bowls of stew, handed one to her without comment, and sat across from her on the floor. You don't owe him anything, he said quietly, stirring his spoon. I know you don't have to forgive him to move forward. She nodded. I know that too. But the bond still pulls. Saris looked into the fire. It does, but I'm no longer tied to it. Fenrich didn't push further. He never did. That was why she trusted him more than anyone she'd known. It's funny, she said after a while, voice softer than smoke. He looked at me today like I was something precious. Because you are. She met Fenric's eyes across the fire. Then why did it take him losing me to see that? Because some alphas only understand value when it's no longer theirs to command. The words didn't sting. They simply settled into the truth she already lived with. I don't hate him, she admitted. Good, Fenric said. Hate is a chain too. But I won't go back. Not for his apology. Not for a broken title. Then you're stronger than most. She smiled faintly. No, I just remember what it felt like to survive the snow. Fenric watched her for a long moment. He'll come again. You know that. Yes, she said. And next time he'll see exactly what rejection couldn't erase. Days passed. Daxon didn't return right away, but word did. A hawk messenger arrived from the council's outpost. Saris wasn't summoned. She was invited. The letter sealed in silver wax was unsigned, but the tone was unmistakable, formal, curious, expectant. The council had heard rumors of an unmarked Omega still bearing the bond of a Luna, of a healer too powerful to remain rogue, of a rejection that never fully severed. They wanted to see for themselves. Saris held the letter in her hands, hot calm, eyes unreadable. She didn't need their validation, but she wouldn't hide either. Not anymore. Not now. She folded the parchment slowly, then looked to Fenric. It's time they learn what a mate's rejection cannot destroy. Fenric nodded. Ven will ride at first light. Chapter 8. Her power, his shame. The council's stronghold was nothing like the land Saris had come to call home, where the rogue valley thrived with untamed growth and soft, wild things. The council's keep loomed like a monument carved from pride and history. Its walls were stone and steel, its windows narrow and tall. The banners that flew from its towers bore ancient symbols of the 5 founding pacts, their authorities stitched into every corner. Saris rode with Fenrich at her side. They didn't speak much on the journey. There was no need to. Everything that could be said had already been carved into their silence. She was not arriving as a supplicant. She would not bow. She would not explain why she still stood. Despite being cast aside, she would simply stand. As the gates opened and the guards looked them over, their eyes lingered on Saris's back. She wore no mark, no crest, no symbol of mate or rank, but she held herself like someone with more power than any Luna should need. They were escorted into the council hall, an arched chamber of white stone and deep crimson banners. High above, the ceiling shimmered with crystal orbs that caught the sunlight and scattered it like stardust. The 5 elders sat at the far end, flanked by 2 scribes and an envoy bearing the seal of Alpha Daxo. She felt his presence before she saw him. Daxon was already there, standing to the left of the main dais. His shoulders squared, his expression unreadable, but his eyes flickered the moment hers met his. Not with triumph, not even with hope, with shame. Saris didn't falter. She approached the stone circle where speakers stood before the council, her boots silent on the polished floor. Saris of the Wild Glen, one elder announced, his voice echoing with ceremonial weight. Omega by birth, healer by gift, and formerly Luna bonded to Alpha Daxon of the Iron Hollow Pack. Formerly rejected, she corrected, her tone calm. Even a few murmurs stirred in the seats beyond. One of the elders, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes, nodded slightly. Indeed, yet the bond persists. You feel it. I feel what's mine, Sarah said, and what I've survived. Your claim, said another, is that you were cast aside unjustly. No, Sarah said simply. My claim is that I survived his rejection and reclaimed my name. I'm not here to beg for a title. I'm here because I was summoned. A long silence followed. Then Daxon stepped forward, his voice but clear. She's more powerful than I ever understood. And I was a coward. Saris turned to him, her expression unreadable. I left her, he continued, because I thought she wasn't enough to carry the title of Luna. But the truth is, I wasn't enough to deserve her. His words landed heavily in the room. One of the elders leaned forward, eyes narrowing. And now, why stand beside her? Now. I don't stand beside her, Daxon said softly. She stands above me. He turned to Ceres. You saved lives in the rogue lands. You healed without rank, without protection. You became what I could never nurture. Ceres blinked slowly. And yet you want me back. I want you to be free. And if that freedom brings you back to me, I'll earn every step toward you. For the first time, Ceres felt the room shift. Not around him, but around her. A councilwoman rose, addressing Ceres directly. We have not seen an unmarked Luna carry such bond strength since the days of the moon trials. You formed something deeper than maidhood. A bond forged in survival, not ceremony. Ceres didn't answer. She didn't need their admiration. Not anymore. Another elder stepped forward. We are prepared to offer you recognition as healer. Yes, but also as Luna. Without him? She asked quietly. With or without? The elder confirmed. The role belongs to the wolf who shapes the pack, not always the one born to lead it. Daxon lowered his head. She turned, facing the room fully. Her voice was quiet, but it filled every corner. I do not want the Luna title as a consolation. I want it if it means I can serve, protect, and never again be defined by someone else's doubts. The councilwoman nodded. Then, so shall it be. They moved forward, offering her the ceremonial chain of recognition. A silver lext once given to Lunas of independent lineages, Ceres accepted it, but only after she wrapped her own herbal string around the chain, weaving her identity into it. Not just healer, not just Luna, survivor. When the ceremony was done, she stepped aside. Daxon hadn't moved. You shamed me, she said finally. But your shame isn't what I'll carry. What will you carry then? He asked softly. My power, she said, and the truth that I was never erased. He nodded, pain clear in his eyes, and for the first time she believed he meant it. She walked past him, not as a mate returned, but as a wolf reborn, and every step was her own. Chapter 9. The One Who Never Looked Back. The journey back from the council stronghold was different. Ceres didn't ride in silence this time. The mountains that loomed on the horizon didn't intimidate her, and the wind didn't carry whispers of doubt. There was no need to wonder if she belonged anymore. She had already decided. Fenrich rode beside her, his expression as unreadable as ever, though his eyes lingered on the chain now resting over her collarbone. Half silver, half twine, a Luna's token, bound with a healer's soul. You didn't need their recognition, he said, breaking the quiet as the last spires of the stronghold faded behind them. No, Ceres agreed. But it's different now that I chose to take it. Fenrich's mouth lifted into something close to a smile. You know, the others are going to ask what happened. What you said, what he said. She looked ahead. The path was long and still, winding through the woods like it was holding its breath. They can ask, she said, but I'm not going to define my story by him. Fenrich didn't press further. He never did. When they returned to the valley, the air felt clearer. The rogues who greeted her didn't see the council's token first. They saw her eyes, steady and calm. They saw her hands worn from healing. They saw Ceres, the woman who had once been left in tea. In the snow, and didn't wait for anyone to come back for her. Later that evening, she returned to the hall. It smelled of sage and firewood. A group of younger rogues were sorting herbs. She taught them to harvest properly. An older wolf sat by the hearth, his injured paw now wrapped in clean linen. The world hadn't stopped while she was gone. It had kept turning just as it always had, with or without a mate. She smiled at them, then stepped into the quiet of her quarters. The silver Antoine chain sat cool against her skin. She lifted it for a moment, studying it in the light. The council had offered her a Mark II, an official branding to show her new title. She had declined. "I don't need another symbol to remind me who I am," she told them. Now, in the comfort of the den she'd built herself, she laid the chain gently on her windowsill and sat in silence. Outside, the trees rustled softly, and moonlight spilled across the floor like a quiet promise. Then there was a knock. She turned, already knowing who it was. Daxon stood in the doorway, not crossing the threshold. His eyes were weary, but he held no pride in his stance, no claim, only stillness. "I didn't expect you to come back here," she said calmly. "I didn't expect you to accept the chain. I accepted it for the wolves who believe in me, not for you." He nodded slowly. "I deserved that." Saris looked at him. Really looked. The alpha who had once rejected her was standing in the same hall where she'd helped raise orphan pups, treated broken ribs, and taught wolves to stand when no one else believed in them. "You still carry the bond," he said quietly. "I do," she replied. "But I don't follow it anymore. It doesn't lead me." "You don't lead me." His voice cracked when he answered. "Do you hate me?" She let the question sit between them, then shook her head. "I did for a time. For the nights I bled in the snow. For the days I wanted to vanish just to forget your name." His gaze dropped to the floor. "But that hate wasn't mine to keep," she continued. "It belongs to the woman I used to be, the one who waited." "And now?" he asked. "Now I walk forward," she said, "with or without your remorse." Daxon stepped back then, as if the space between them had grown wider. Perhaps it had, or perhaps Saris had simply outgrown the path that led back to him. He turned to leave, but paused. "There was a time when I thought being alpha meant choosing strength over emotion, command over care. But you made me see the kind of alpha I should have been." She didn't answer. "I won't ask to be forgiven," he added, "but I'll carry the memory of what I lost. I just needed you to know that." And then, without waiting for more, he left. Sarah stood still for a long time, letting the silence wrap around her like a cloak. She didn't cry. She didn't crumble. She didn't look back. Instead, she moved to the herb table, sorting dried petals with the care of someone whose hands had rebuilt more than one life. There was still work to do. There were wolves who needed her, pups with dreams, shifters with no name, but endless worth. She was not the Luna who had been abandoned. She was the one who stayed behind and became more, and she no longer needed a mate to be whole. Chapter 10. What Luna Means Without a Mate. A council's chain lay untouched on Saris's windowsill. It gleamed each morning, catching sunlight as if to remind her that power, like healing, was a quiet thing. It didn't shout or command. It simply was earned, not given. Saris stepped outside, breathing in the cool morning air. Fenrich was already gathering the younger wolves for training, their laughter bouncing off the cliffs like birdsong. A few pups ran to greet her, wrapping small arms around her legs before darting off again. None of them called her Luna. Not yet. Not because they didn't believe it, but because she hadn't claimed it for herself. And that question, the one that had nestled in her ribs since the moment the council handed her that chain, was finally rising to the surface. What does Luna mean without a mate? The role was always tied to the alpha. A position to complement, to stand beside, not above, not alone. The mate of the alpha, his echo, his balance. But what if the alpha failed to be worthy? What if the mate rose while he fell? She walked through the village, passing wolves who looked up to her, not because of who had once claimed her, but because of what she had done. The healed, the exiled, the forgotten, her pack. By midday, she found herself standing at the center stone, a wide, ancient slab engraved with the names of rogue leaders who had come before. No one had carved anything new into it for years. Fenrich joined her there, arms crossed, eyes scanning the hills beyond. "They'll follow you," he said. Saras tilted her. "You think so?" "I know so. You've led without the title. They trust you more than they Esli did an Alpha. All me." She looked down at her hands. "Then why does part of me still feel uncertain? Like I'm stepping into something that was never meant for me?" "Because you're not doing it the way the stories tell you to," Fenrich said. "You're not tied to a bond or a male or a moon-blessed prophecy. You're doing it your way. And that scares the ones who still believe tradition is sacred." He turned toward her fully. "You think healing without a mate's mark makes you weaker. It doesn't. It means you made yourself strong." Saras said nothing for a moment. "Then the council offered me a place in their sanctum. Not beside Daxon. Not beside anyone, just me." Fenrich's eyebrows raised slightly. "That's rare. They said I could oversee rogue representation, help bridge the divide. And will you take it?" She looked up at the sky. It was beginning to cloud. Gray threads weaving across the blue. "I don't care." "No, I want to lead, but I don't know if I want to leave here." Fenrich gave a soft huff of agreement. "Then, maybe you don't have to decide right now." Just then, a howl echoed from the southern ridge. Not a warning, but a summoning. Saras and Fenrich both stilled. It was Daxon again. Later that afternoon, she found him waiting just beyond the boundary line where the rogues agreed outsiders would not cross. He looked worse than before. Paula hunched slightly as if something inside him had begun to deteriorate. "You're sick," she said plainly. He nodded. "The bond. I ignored it too long." "You severed it," she reminded. "You chose another." "I chose wrong," he said, voice hoarse. "And now I feel the cost. My pack does too." She didn't offer sympathy. "You still came here." "I came not to beg, not to demand, just to ask a question." Saras crossed her arms. "What does Luna mean without a mate?" he asked, echoing the same question she had wrestled with. She blinked. He continued. "Because if it means leading with strength, you have it. If it means protecting the pack, you've done it. If it means healing, guiding, commanding, you've already earned it." "I don't need you to validate me," she said softly, but there was no venom in it, just truth. "I know," he replied, but I needed to say it anyway. For the first time, Daxon didn't look like an alpha trying to reclaim a throne. He looked like a man finally understanding the weight of his failure. "I thought marking you was the only way to complete the bond," he added. "But maybe the moon marked you another way." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I saw it when you stood before the council. There was something light silver, almost like it came from beneath your skin. Not the mark of a mate, but something older." Saras remembered the faint shimmer, the sudden warmth on her shoulder. She had thought it was the magic of the hall. "You might not be a lunar through me," he said, stepping back. "But the moon still claimed you." She watched him go, and when she returned to the center stone that night, she brought with her a carving tool. Slowly, carefully, she etched a single symbol beside the oldest name, a crescent moon rising from snow. No mate's name, no alpha's title, just hers. Because Luna didn't have to mean someone's other half. It could mean whole. Chapter 11. A pack without an alpha. The moon hung low in the sky, veiled in soft mist. When Saras gathered the rogues, they met on the cliff plateau, a place once used for danishments, now reclaimed by wolves who refused to vanish. No one wore ceremonial garb. There were no horns, no council emissaries, just wolves, just truth. She didn't stand on a dais, she stood among them. And they circled around her, not because she commanded it, but because they chose to. "Some of you came here because you were cast out," she said, voice calm and even. "Some ran from violence. Some were rejected. Some just wanted to be free." They listened, eyes steady. No one shifted. Not one voice interrupted. "For too long, we thought not being part of a pack made us lesser. That without an alpha, we couldn't be strong. that without a mate, we couldn't be whole. She let the silence stretch, giving them space to remember their own wounds. But strength doesn't come from a bloodline or a title. It comes from choosing each other day after day, without fear, without force. Fenrich, standing near the edge, nodded once, no longer her guard, just her equal. "I'm not asking to be your Luna," she continued. "I already am, not by bond, not by mate, but by action. You know who I am, you know what I've done, you've seen it." She reached up, unclasping the silver Antine chain. "I was given this to mark my place in the council, but I don't need it to mark my place with you." She dropped it gently onto the earth. No gasps, just a quiet understanding. Then, one by one, wolves began to step forward. An older she-wolf, who'd lost her son in a raid, brought a carved run stone and laid it beside the chain. A young wolf, still limping from an old battle, offered a strip of cloth stained with healing herbs. Ceres's own stitching down its edge. A child, no more than 6, placed a hand-carved wolf figurine in the circle. "You made my nightmare stop," he whispered. Ceres blinked fast, but didn't cry. She hadn't asked for symbols, but they gave them. Not because tradition told them to, but because they chose how to honor her. And in that circle of offerings, something new began to form. A totem not of legacy, but of rebirth. Fenrich spoke next. "No alpha will be crowned here," he said. "Not because we're without one, but because we've outgrown the need." Some looked surprised. Some looked relieved, but no one objected. "We will have leaders," he continued. "Voices, guardians, but not rulers, not kings or queens or mates binding us by force." He turned to Ceres. "We have a Luna, one who rose from snow and silence, one who healed us long before she ever asked us to follow." And that's when they began to howl. Low at first, 1, then 2, until the entire plateau echoed with the voices of wolves who had once been cast aside. Ceres stood among them, the sound washing over her like waves. It wasn't a call for war. It wasn't a cry of mourning. It was recognition. She was no longer the healer from the snow, no longer the forgotten mate. She was theirs. Later, when the moon reached its peak, Fenrich found her sitting quietly by the fire, a pup curled against a leg. "Do you miss him?" he asked. She didn't need to ask who. "I miss the version of him I thought existed," she said. "But no, I don't miss the man who left me in the snow." He nodded. "He's not an alpha anymore." He stepped down voluntarily. Ceres raised an eyebrow, said his mate rejected the title, said he wasn't fit to lead. Was that for guilt or redemption? She asked. Maybe both. She let the fire crackle between them. "There's something strange about it," she murmured. "For the first time, I don't know what comes next. And that doesn't scare me." "It shouldn't," Fenrich said. "You're not walking behind anyone anymore." Ceres looked out at the pack. Wolves laughing, cooking, chasing each other through the tall grass. A family built not by tradition, but by choice. A pack with no alpha, but not without a leader, and never again without a lunar. Chapter 12. The mark I never wore. It began as a shimmer beneath her skin. At first, Ceres thought it was fatigue, a trick of the firelight, or the ache of too many long days healing, guiding, stitching back the hearts and hopes of others. But no, this was something else. The first time she saw it, she was kneeling by the stream with her sleeves rolled up. The sunlight caught her forearm, and something glimmered just beneath the surface, like silver thread braided into her skin. When she looked closer, it vanished. She didn't tell Fenrich. She didn't tell anyone. Instead, she watched. Over the next few days, it deepened, curling along her arm in spirals and sharp lines. Not a scar, not a wound, not anything she could touch or feel, only see. And only when the moonlight hit just right. She waited until the third night before she went to the sea. The pack sea was blind in both eyes, but sharper in spirit than anyone Ceres had ever met. A quiet, wiry woman named Olivine, who spoke as if the stars whispered directly to her. She lived just beyond the cliff edge in a burrow of stones, herbs, and smoke. "You came alone," Olivine said, before Ceres even stepped inside. "I had to. Something is changing in you." "I don't know what it is," Ceres admitted, "but it's not mine." Olivine motioned her forward. "Show me." Ceres rolled up her sleeve. In the candlelight, nothing showed. But as Olivine cupped her hand and blew out the flame, the moonlight pouring in from the burrow roof exposed the pattern. Silver glowed across Ceres's skin. Not ink, not pain, just light. Olivine exhaled sharply. "That," she whispered, "is no mark from a mate. I've never been marked." "You're being chosen again," the seer murmured. "But not by a wolf. By the moon itself." Ceres's breath caught. "No one is marked by the moon. That's myth." "It was," Olivine said. "Until you." The seer motioned for her to sit. She began grinding herbs and mixing ash with water, muttering low chants in the old tongue. When she finished, she painted symbols across Ceres's collarbone and arms. Then, she placed a cool stone against her sternum. "When the moon marks a wolf," Olivine said, "it is not for love. It is not for lineage. It is for balance. Balance. The moon doesn't bind hearts. It mends what others break. The rejected, the forgotten, the left behind. You are the correction." Ceres stared at the glowing pattern beneath her skin. "What does that mean for me?" "It means you are no longer tied to the bond you lost." "You no longer belong to him," Ceres swallowed. Her chest felt both light and unbearably full. "You are more than Luna now," Olivine continued. "You are a bridge between what was and what will be. The mark you never wore is the one that matters most." A gust of wind blew through the burrow. Ceres felt the mark pulse like a heartbeat not her own, sinking with the thrum of the earth beneath her. When she left Olivine's dwelling, she didn't speak a word to anyone. But that night, as she stood on the high ridge and looked at the stars, she removed the shawl from her shoulders and let the moonlight touch her bare skin. The mark glowed fully now, clear, undeniable. She was not claimed, she was called. And deep in the woods, far from her gaze, another figure stumbled to his knees. Daxon gasped as his own bond thread snapped once more. This time, not from her rejection, but from something higher than either of them. He clutched his chest. His wolf howled in agony because even though he had stepped down, even though he had let her go, he hadn't expected the moon to do the same. Back at the rogue camp, Fenric found Ceres standing barefoot in the moonlight. "You're not like us anymore," he said quietly. "I don't know what I am," she replied. "You're not just ours now," he murmured. "You're the moon's." She turned, the light casting silver across her skin. "And if I didn't ask for it, maybe it asked for you." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because deep in her bones, Ceres understood something she'd never dared to believe. The mark she never wore, the one Daxon denied her, had never truly been hers to begin with. But this one, this mark of light and silence, of pain and power, it was not earned. It was given, and it could not be taken. Not again, not by anyone. Chapter 13. The Reclaiming. The moon called, and the old magic answered. It began with a tremor in the earth beneath Ceres's feet. A pull so ancient and strong, it echoed through the soles of her boots, through her bones, up her spine, like a river reversing its flow. The seer had warned her this day would come, but no warning could prepare her for the gravity of it. The reclaiming, a ritual so old most packs had buried its name in fear. A ceremony invoked not by alphas or councils, but by the moon itself. When a bond had been wrongly broken and fate demanded balance, Saris stood alone in the clearing. Snowflakes drifted gently through the canopy above, yet none dared land on her skin. The mark on her arm glowed steadily beneath her cloak, its spirals and crescent pulsing to a rhythm only she could hear. "The circle has been drawn," said Olivine softly, stepping beside her. The seer carried a basin of silver water and herbs, her hands shaking, not from age, but from reverence. "Are you sure?" Saris's voice was quiet but certain. "I am. You understand the risks. If the moon finds me unworthy," Saris said, "it will sever the bond forever. And if it doesn't," Saris looked toward the distant trees where Shael moved, where breath fogged in the cold, where Daxon waited. "If it doesn't," she murmured, "then the bond reforms, stronger, deeper, unbreakable." Olivine nodded once and stepped back. The robe pack stood in silent formation along the edge of the glade, forming a sacred circle with their presence alone. No one spoke, not even Fenric. Across from her, Daxon emerged. His cloak was heavy with snow. His steps were slow, his posture strained. The fractured bond had taken its toll on him. Lines of exhaustion carved into his face. His frame thinner, his shoulders burdened by more than just weight. But his eyes found her through the snowfall, and for a moment, the world dropped away. He stepped into the circle. She didn't flinch. Not this time. The bond was broken unjustly. Olivine's voice rang out into the wind. "The moon has marked its protest. Now the bond must be tested, not for what it once was, but for what it could still be." Daxon's voice was, "And if she refuses me again, then the moon severs it cleanly forever." He looked at Saris. "And if you refuse, I've already made peace with that," she said. "I came here for closure, not reunion." He took a breath. "I came here to offer everything I wasn't brave enough to give before. You offered it too late." I know the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of all the words never spoken, all the nights spent questioning, all the wounds that had never been allowed to scar. Olivine lifted her hands. "Begin." Saris and Daxon each stepped forward, hands hovering over the basin between them. Their fingers didn't touch, but the water in the bowl rippled. Light poured from Saris's mark, tracing a line across the surface, dancing like moonlight on a lake. "I rejected you," Daxon said, his voice steady despite the tremble in it. "Not because you were weak, but because I was. I let others speak louder than the bond. I let pride win." Saris didn't blink. "You left me in the snow. I know. You left me to die." His jaw tightened. "And that's something I will never forgive myself for." The mark on Saris's arm flared brighter, casting light across both their faces. The snow stopped falling. "And if I say it's too late?" she asked. He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could hear the change in his breath. "Then I'll carry the pain of it forever. But if there's even a sliver of space left between what we were and what we might become, then I will wait. I'll rebuild from nothing if I must." Saris looked down at the water. Her reflection stared back. Not broken, not small, not lunar in waiting. Just Saris, just whole. She placed her hand into the basin. So did he. The silver water steamed. The glow from her mark poured down into the water, met by a pale, hesitant shimmer from Daxon's wrist. Where once there had been no mark at all, gasps rippled through the circle, because now on his arm, matching hers in form, though not in intensity, was a responding symbol. Not a traditional mate mark, something older, the moon's will. The basin shattered between them with a sharp crack, sending water and silver light into the air. Neither moved. Saris stared at the mark forming on Daxon's skin. Faint, fragile, but present. It was not the moon's forgiveness. It was its offer. "You may reclaim the bond," Olivine said, "but it is her who decides." Saris stepped back. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She simply stood tall, the mark glowing brighter, as if echoing her choice. And then she turned away, Not out of hate, not out of pain, but peace, because the moon had answered. The bond had been seen, weighed, balanced, and in doing so, it had given Saris exactly what she needed, a choice that belonged to her. She walked from the circle without hesitation. Daxon remained frozen in place, his eyes never leaving her. And though the mark on his arm remained, it pulsed slower now, as if waiting, hoping, but not demanding. Because what had been reclaimed was not love, it was Saris. It is her future, and it was hers alone. Chapter 14. The Mate I Chose Again. The moon hung low in the sky that night, swollen and golden, its light softer than before, like it too had waited for her answer. Saris didn't sleep. She sat on the rise above the camp, where the wind whispered through the frostbitten trees and the stars blinked like secrets. Below, the rogue pack slept soundly, protected by Fenric's border patrols, and the old magic Olivine had awakened. Her fingers brushed the mark glowing faintly on her skin, the moon's mark. It had not faded after the reclaiming. Neither had Daxon's, but the bond wasn't forcing anything. It simply waited. Fenrich approached before dawn. His tread so quiet it might have been part of the forest itself. He didn't speak right away, just sat beside her, as he always had when words weren't enough. She was grateful for that. "You did something most wolves wouldn't dare," he said finally. "I didn't win anything." "No," he agreed. "But you didn't lose yourself either." Saris looked at him. "Did I do the right thing, Fawn?" His answer came without hesitation. "You chose. That was the right thing." She breathed out slowly. "But what if I don't know what I want anymore?" "That's still a choice. Knowing you're not ready to choose is better than rushing to feel whole." She fell silent. The wind carried the faintest howl across the distant peaks, lonely and long. Daxon. He hadn't returned to his pack. Olivine said he remained at the old sacred glade, not waiting for her, just waiting, as though unsure what he was now that the bond pulsed but didn't pull. He was finally experiencing what she had lived with for months. The ache of something half finished, half erased. "You could end it cleanly," Fenrich offered gently. "Olivine says the moon would honor it now, let you move forward, unmarked." Saris looked down at her hands, steady, capable. But something in her chest stirred, uncomfortable, insistent. "What if I'm not ready to move on?" she whispered. "What if the version of me that loved him still exists?" Fenrich didn't answer. She turned to him, eyes brimming, but dry. "You hate him. I don't matter in this. You do." He looked at her then, and for once his calm slipped. "You almost died, Saris. He left you in the snow. I carried you out with your breath fading. He made a choice. I saw the cost." She didn't look away. "And you stayed," his jaw clenched. "I would again." She reached out and placed her hand over his. A healer's touch even now. Not a promise. Not a bond. Just gratitude. "Thank you." Then she stood and began walking. Fenrich didn't stop her. He didn't have to. This wasn't a moment of surrender or return. This was the moment Saris needed to see if the pain had simply numbed or healed. The journey back to the glade was quiet. She passed no patrols, no signs of alphas, just a single worn path beneath her feet and the thrum of her own heartbeat. When she arrived, Daxon was sitting beneath the moonstone altar, back resting against its base. His cloak was drawn tight. He didn't react when she approached, didn't rise or speak. Only when she sat beside him did he turn. "I thought you might come," he said quietly. "I didn't come to stay." He nodded once. She studied him. Not the alpha who had roared in council halls or towered over his pack, but the man underneath, pale, hollow-eyed, quiet. "How long has your mark been glowing?" she asked. "Since the night I found you in the snow," he admitted. "I just couldn't see it until I lost you." Saris looked down at the frost between them. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't deserve to speak it. ... Silence again. "Then you could reclaim the title of Luna now." The council would follow it. The mark is proof. I'm not here for titles. He turned fully toward her now. Then what are you here for? Her hand touched the mark on her arm to see if I could forgive you. And I'm not sure I can, but I'm no longer sure I can't. He exhaled shakily. I'll never ask you to forget. But if you ever remember us, I hope it's not only pain. You see, I remember both, she said. The way you held my hand the first time I healed someone, the way you listened when no one else did, and the way you left. He lowered his gaze. I don't need you to be my mate, she said. I don't need your name or your pack. Then what do you need? She paused, lifting her eyes to the sky. I need to choose you or not, and have that choice be mine alone. He nodded slowly. Then I'll be here until you do. Not waiting, she asked. No. Living, changing. Becoming the wolf I should have been the first time. She looked at him for a long moment, then stood again. He did not follow, and that was how she knew he meant it. Later that week, when the Alpha Council asked her to claim a new role, something never offered to an unmarked Omega before, she smiled. I already have a title, she said, voice calm and clear. They leaned in. What is it? She looked past them toward the horizon. Healer, Chapter 15. The Snow That Did Not Kill Me. The snow fell, again, soft and silent, blanketing the earth in a layer of cold white lace. Sarah stood at the edge of the valley where her story had nearly ended, wrapped in a dark blue cloak, stitched with wolf patterns by the elders of the rogue camp. She had returned to the place that had once tried to bury her, not as a lost mate, not as a castaway, but as someone reborn. The trees had thinned since last winter, their boughs weighed by a gentler snowfall. Birds still sang in distant thicket. Life hadn't stopped here. It had simply moved on. So had she. Saras walked the path she had once crawled, her footprints clean and confident this time. The cave where Fenric had first carried her, empty now, stood quiet, like a memory etched into stone. She paused there, placing her hand against its cool wall. Thank you. The words never left her lips, but the earth felt them. She believed that. In the distance, she could hear the faint sounds of a returning pack. The rogue settlement had grown. Wolves, once marked as outcasts, were building homes, sharing food, raising young without fear of hierarchy. They had chosen her to guide. Not Rule, not Luna, not Alpha, just Sarence, the one who had survived. News from the larger packs had trickled in slowly over the moons. Daxon's former pack had begun to rebuild under a new council structure. Not without struggle, but the rot had been cleared. Warriors trained not just for strength, but for compassion. Healers were honored, not hidden. Daxon never reclaimed it. His title. He remained on the outskirts, offering aid where he could, but never pushing for power. A quiet penance. Sometimes he visited the edge of the rogue lands, not to beg, not to plead, but to watch from afar. Never once had he crossed without invitation. Today, as the snow light shimmered on the hills, he stood at the same ridge. Sarah saw him. He didn't move. Neither did she, for a long time. Then, slowly she raised her hand, not beckoning, not dismissing, simply acknowledging. A shared recognition. The past existed, but it didn't define the future. Behind her, the rogue pups ran through the snow, laughing, unaware of the heavy histories that lived in the trees. Olivine stirred the healing fires. Fenric hauled fresh wood into the circle of warmth. His presence, steady as ever. Life had become hers again. On her terms, Saras turned back to the clearing, the cold brushing her cheeks. She knelt, pressed her palm to the snow, and whispered, "You didn't kill me." And when she rose, it was with the grace of someone who had walked through every shadow and returned with her own light. The wind howled softly, not in mourning, but in song, and for the first time, she held back. If this story stirred your heart or made you howl a little inside, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed listening to this story, please hit the like button, share it with someone who'd love this, and subscribe to Nightbond Narratives and ring the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Tell me in the comments below which part of the world you are watching from. Also tell me which part of the story you like the most. Compilation of a video of an audiobook takes a lot of time and effort. So if you see any ambiguity, please ignore it. I hope you will appreciate my effort.